welcome to another Motion Mondays. My name is Cyn Lagos and I will be your mentor today. We're going to be exploring Adobe Premiere and best of all, we're going to be exploring color, which who doesn't love color? So my name is Cyn. I have a background in photography, graphic design, and video editing. A lot of those different sections, different mediums, I taught myself. So I'm glad you're here because that means we're very alike. We're very like-minded people teaching ourselves any form, any medium, any new craft. So today we're going to be exploring color, and I do have a background in photography, so I wanted to share why that matters today. So a lot of the things I learned in photography stem from another space in the Adobe Creative Cloud, which is Adobe Lightroom. And I love it because I get to kind of compare the two. Premiere and Lightroom are actually very alike. So I'm going to jump on the chat and see who is here, but let me know. I have a quick question for you today. What level of color editing are you in? Are you a beginner, intermediate, or advanced? If you're advanced, you're just like enjoying spending time with us. That's awesome. If you're beginner or intermediate, this definitely is going to be for you, but I'll be very surprised if you don't get a little nugget or two if you're advanced, because I am going to be dispelling a few things that I found that I did not know even existed within Premiere. So let's look at the chat real quick. Let's see here. Who do we have? We have Keys. We have Oliver. We have Robert. Oh my God, Robert, you're awesome. Good night from Sweden. Oh, Sweden. That sounds incredible. And we have Jack, of course. I think I said that. We have Paloma. So many cool peeps. Nice. I love it when Jack moderates. That's so awesome. Okay, Oliver says beginner, cool. So a lot of these things should be really, really helpful for you. Okay, so as we dive into Premiere, let's go on here. Okay, folks. So before we dive into Premiere, I want to share a special space on the interwebs where I like to share all my resources. So if you're not familiar with this space, today there's a special little giveaway. So definitely check it out. Let's take a look. Okay, so this is my website, cynlagos.com/medium unlimited. Medium Unlimited could be found under here also. In here, you can replay so many different streams that we've covered here on Adobe Live on Motion Mondays. Really cool stuff. Okay, what I want you to see is this little section right here. So in here, there's a free download, and today we're going to be covering color. So of course, I made a LUT available for you. And you're going to see how we create this vintage LUT, so you can create it from scratch. But if you also want to have it and create a download, there it is, just for you. Okay, let's dive into Adobe Premiere. Let's go on here. And I'm going to be in the Adobe Premiere regular version, not the beta version. So I tend to jump around between the two. Honestly, there's very little difference except when there's a new feature or there's a couple bugs on the beta version. So be aware whenever you use any of the two, you may be encountering a different experience because they're meant to be different in that sense. But otherwise, you can work on the same project on either one. So you're safe to open the file on beta or on Premiere. Either way works. Okay, so let's jump on here and immediately, I think I want to do a quick editing. So I recently I'm in Austin, by the way, and I recently went to a car show nearby, and I thought that was gonna be okay, like a few cars, but it was so many cool cars. I was definitely drooling over so many beautiful vintage vehicles. They just don't make them like this anymore. Potentially they do. I don't know. Maybe our cars will be the cars of the past one day. But yeah, so I happen to have my camera with me, which has been a vow that I recently created for myself. I said, I have to take my camera wherever I go. This is going to be really important, especially because I just acquired the FX30, which is a video camera. So much video that it doesn't even have a viewfinder on it. So I was like, you know what? I have to take this camera out. I have to give myself opportunities to get to know it better. I had just recently created my settings so I can take footage just like this. So this footage is Rec 709. It's flat on purpose, right? So that we can come in here in the post-editing process and do some color. Okay, so let's do just that. Right away, what I want you to do here is work in a way that is non-destructive. So the best way to do that is, by the way, I have so many organized folders in here. I love it. So the way to do that is to go into your graphics and create an adjustment layer. You're gonna do that by going to New Item and going to Color Matte. Just kidding. New Item and Adjustment Layer. And you can see there's already an adjustment layer there, so I don't need to create it in this case. But that's how you do it. Now, an adjustment layer can take on so many different properties. This time we're gonna focus it on color. So I'll just quickly rename this color. You might not see that, but I did. Okay, we're gonna drag that into our timeline. Now there are a couple things that can happen on an adjustment color, and there are some that have to happen exclusively on the clip itself. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But this particular workflow will be just fine here. So let's open up Lumetri Color while having our adjustment clicked on. So that's selected right there. And we're gonna go into Lumetri Color. I love how the chat knows everybody. They're like, hi, Barbara. Hi, Joshua. Everybody knows everybody. That's awesome. Okay, so we're here in the Lumetri Color. And if I just dive into this, immediately, these are the first things I like to do. So order of operations is usually correction and then creative, right? So correction, meaning things that are a little bit off. Maybe it wasn't bright enough. Maybe it's a little bit too overexposed. When it comes to video, overexposing is better than underexposing, unlike photography. So what I might do immediately is go into my curves tool. So I tend to do this very commonly also in my Lightroom workflow, where I skip basic corrections and I skip creative. Creative doesn't exist in Lightroom, but I just skip basic corrections. In here, you have the very basic things to do, but if you really want to get a little bit more focused, detail-oriented work, you want to jump over to these other tabs over here. So starting at curves, right? So think of basic corrections as fast, creative as fast, and then curves, more attention to detail, anything below that. So already you can see there's these really interesting graphs, right? They are flatlined. There's not much going on with them outside of that. But you will notice they all have a particular category. So we have hue versus saturation. We've got hue versus hue. We've got hue versus luminance, right? And then we have luminance versus saturation. I do not know why the versus, saturation versus saturation, but the word versus makes it feel like it's a lot more complicated than it really is. But in reality, hue is the second one is the property. The first one is what you're selecting. I'm selecting the color, the hue red. The property is how much saturation do I want? How little saturation do I want? I am selecting the hue red. How much hue, where in the hue spectrum am I going to land in this area? So on and so forth, right? Okay, so that said, I'm gonna go in here and I can see there's a lot of orange happening in here. So if I was just to click around in any particular area of the spectrum and just pull up or down, up gives us more saturation. So already that looks different, right? Like looks a lot better. Then we've got here going down, that's desaturation, which is perfect for isolating different colors. If you want a color to pop, if you want the background to be less important than the foreground, I often use it that way. So as you can tell, I'm not selecting a particular hue. I'm selecting the entire spectrum of the graph, right? So we can pull it up. Now, if we want to be more selective, we can select a particular hue. So in this case, I'll pick red and I'll just bring up the red. So then the rest can remain desaturated. It can remain as neutral saturation, right? Okay, let's do a little bit of the same here on hue versus hue. we just pull it up and you can see the color changes based on which area I am navigating, right? So if I go up into the purple hues, down into more like the blue hues, and now suddenly we've changed our footage altogether. And mind you, this entire thing is happening on the adjustment layer. So now we've got our baby blue vintage vehicle. And what you can hear is some really like classic Texas music, like old school. Okay, so that looks awesome. That's a great way to change the color of something if you wanted to. But of course, it really depends on your clip. There are some clips who are better candidates for this effect, and some other ones require a little bit more work. So we will jump into how we can isolate some of the colors here, and you all have two alternatives. Okay, so in this case, I don't want to go away from the color of my original hue here. So I'm just going to keep this and just keep it around there. I think I didn't need to isolate that. I think we'll do something like, I can also just unclick that one and that one will not be affected at all. All right. So hue versus luminance, we're going to go up into our luminance factor. So how much light is in a color. So this can get a little bit tricky, especially with video. You have to be fairly aware that there is so many versions and so many little particles of color happening here at once. So to the naked eye, you don't really sense that up until you start doing something like this and you can see all the different particles of red hue that we have here, right? And that's going to be always important because I think as a whole, we think, okay, that car is red, therefore everything is the same exact hue and tonality. But no, this car is being lit in so many different ways. There's a little bit more light on the left side, therefore it's more tinted than tone. Tone has black, tint has white. Okay, so far so good. Let's do a few more edits here on the graph with the luminance. Bringing up the luminance is a good trick to adding more saturation or vibrance in a way that saturation feels just not quite the same. All right, so we have something like this. And let's do a quick play. It's like constantly playing, Who Do You Love? Let's see if you can hear it. It's nice, right? Okay, so now that I've done this, let's take a look at what we did. So that we have this adjustment layer right here. I'm gonna go into my effects panel and just move over this adjustment layer right there. So you're able to see where I created the effect. So on the left-hand side, we've got no edit. On the right-hand side, we've got an edit. And that is a neutral effect, mind you. We did not go too far out into the creative space. We just made sure to have enough contrast, color contrast, bring back those hues back into our scene. And you do have to be a little bit more careful when it comes to selecting the hue, because there are several hues within your color palette. So be aware that you could have a tint and you could have a tone at the same time. So far, so good. I'm liking how this works. And I think I'm gonna bring back my adjustment layer right there. And you can see here in my adjustment layer, now I have a Lumetri Color, right? So that is an effect. If I click this effects, it turns it off, right? And now in here, you're welcome to layer on as many Lumetri Color effects as you want. So a lot of people don't know this, but you're not done the moment you do one Lumetri Color. You can layer as many as you want. So let's get back in here for the sake of showing that demonstration. Let's go into Lumetri Color and get back to the top and going to this little drop-down menu, which gives us add a Lumetri Color effect. So this is an additional Lumetri Color effect. If I go back to the effects panel, I can see now that I have two Lumetri Color effects, right? One of them has the effect that we just did right now, which is just color focused on the curves. And then one of them has nothing at the moment, right? We can put one over the other and that will change the effect altogether. So be aware of the positioning of your Lumetri colors. From here, I want to show you this. You can access your Lumetri color properties. all of your properties, your basics, your creative, your curves, colors. So let's go back in here into curves, and you can see that same curve tool, right? But this time I'm going to go into this section of my curves to create a little contrast. And so that Lumetri effect is based only and solely on contrast. So a way I would use this in to remain organized would be doing some technical corrections on one Lumetri and doing some color corrections on another. So that way you can compartmentalize your order of operations. And this is going to be helpful just for you to get used to knowing that you can rely on a workflow. And this here now at the moment is being affected from top to bottom, right? So we've got this one, we've got this one. No filter, no color, some color, some contrast. And there you go. So that is a way to pancake or layer our Lumetri color so far. So far so good. We're doing great. All right. So one of the things I wanted to do here also is show you how we can create a preset from this, a lookup table from this. So let's go in here. And I think this time, let's go back to our color one. I think that's the one I want. Yeah, that's the one I want. So a lot of people get confused over this, like how do I make my own LUT? So it is a little bit hidden. I didn't notice that it was really hidden, actually. The question's there because, folks, the UI is not that simple, but it isn't here or even here. I would think it would be there. It is up here in this little sandwich, little burger drop down, okay? So when you click on it, you're gonna find these options. You're gonna find export look.cube and save preset, right? And I'm gonna have you focus on these three. The reason why is because all those three can kind of get tossed around as the same thing. So they're not the same thing. A .look is exclusive to Premiere, from my understanding. So if you want to exchange a color profile that you've created, all those cool settings that we just did, and you want to give it over to a colleague or hand it over to your viewers who also use Premiere, then you can use a .look, right? But that is not going to be universal for other editing apps, okay? However, a .cube is. So if you want to have a universal LUT, you might export a .cube, which can look really convoluted when it's exported. So .look is a lot simpler, but nevertheless, they accomplish the same thing. Okay, now what is save a preset? So you may be familiar with presets in general to create a transition effect, maybe a quick wipe out or slide in, those types of effects, right? But presets can exist for so many things. I'm going to show you where. So remember, that's where you export all your stuff. Let's talk about presets. All right, so let's go in here. I've separated these in different sequences. All right, so let's go into our preset adjustment tool. Barbara says, it reminds me of my first Chevy. That was peach and gray. You had a Chevy that was peach and gray. That's all I want to say. Okay, that's pretty awesome. Okay, so then now let's talk about presets, okay? Now, presets was something I found sort of by accident. I was like, wait, hold on. You can do this? So let's come over here to this section. It was a wonderful day. We had live music, so that was really cool. I'm working on a 1080 by 1920 sequence. So a lot of my files are a little bit bigger because they're actually filmed at 4K. And this is how I can show you here. So if I go up to here, you can see that. Sometimes the close-ups are kind of cool. Okay, so now just like what we did before, we're gonna use an adjustment layer. And this is gonna be helpful because I wanted to explore as much as possible what presets can do. So let's go into the graphics. I'm gonna grab this adjustment layer. And mind you, another question I used to have about adjustment layers is if I affected one adjustment layer and I drop in another one, the same one, into a different sequence, does it add those properties? It doesn't. It's a neutral layer. You can see nothing happened. But it's still the same adjustment layer here, right? But this adjustment layer has properties in it. You can see them right here. Has Lumetri colors and things like this, right? But this one doesn't. It's a neutral one. So that's a good pro tip to know. You don't have to make multiple adjustment layers. Okay, so now in our adjustment layer, what I want to do, I'm going to bring these back to the original size. I'm going to do set to frame size to this one. I have a shortcut, set to frame size to that one, and set to frame size to this one as well. It's always nice to film 4K because you have that flexibility of the sizing. And in here, I try to do a couple shots. I try to do a close-up shot, a nice establishing shot, so something a little bit further, some close-up here, something further, and a nice angle. Like I said, take out your cameras, folks. You never know when you have an opportunity to shoot, just because. Nobody hired me for this, okay? I just shot it because I wanted to practice my craft, and that makes sense. Okay, so I have my adjustment layer and I have my footage, and this is working perfectly. So now what I want to do in here in this adjustment layer, I'm going to make this bigger so you can see, is I'm going to make a few cuts all across. This is just to demonstrate the power of presets. So it's more for demo purposes. All right, so let's say, for example, I do something like this. Each cut is going to allow me to add separate properties to the layers. So let's go in here into the presets panel. So when you go into effects, you're going to find a bunch of presets. These presets can't get any bigger, so hopefully you can see the left side here, but we will get somewhere. Under presets, we have audio presets, we have transition presets, video presets, so on, so forth. So the goal here is that these presets were created by somebody, right? So we want to be able to repurpose them somehow, and they make our workflow much faster. So whether you need audio, video, or visuals, right? So we do have a folder called Lumetri presets. Did you know that was there? Okay, Lumetri presets. How is this different from LUTs? Oh my God, where presets are a little bit closer to actions. If you're familiar with the Adobe ecosystem where we create actions, we memorize those actions, we record them, and then they happen. So all of those settings are now presetted, right? So within here, you're gonna find different presets, like this is when it gets pretty, right? When it gets cool. We've got CineSpace 100. Some of them are inspired by film, of course, film footage. We've got cinematic, we've got film stock, we've got monochrome, speed locks, okay, speed locks and looks, okay. We got black magic if you want to work with things like this. So mind you, there's no hard rule. If you want to drop a black magic on a Sony and see what happens, go for it. Really, no hard rule here. But if you do want a universal look, you can go into, oh, we have technicals. We can go in here into the universal section, and we're gonna find these similar looks, right? Something a little bit cooler on the cool side, something a little bit warmer, and you can see there's a tiny little preview of my footage. Okay, so then what I'm gonna do is explore all of these. And since I just divided my adjustment layer, I can add drag and drop. That's simple. We don't have to do all those settings that we just did, which is totally fine. I enjoy that process too. But if you're in a hurry, right, you wanna use a couple presets, I can just drag and drop some of these and see what works. Something like that. Maybe I do want a black and white one. Let's check that out. What would it look like if it's a little bit warmer? Let's check out some of those black magics. This is shot on a Sony, but who cares, right? Let's just try it out. We got some Fuji in here. Let's see, where was that black magic? There you are. I think there was one here that I really liked. That looks great. That looks phenomenal. Let's try a few more. So mind you, all I'm doing is dragging and dropping. Yes, of course, that thumbnail gives me a little preview, so I can base my decision of that out of that little thumbnail. But what better than dropping them into my footage and seeing which of these work or don't work. Let's do something like this. Okay, so now let's do a quick play so we can see what happened here. So I've added several presets and several cuts of my adjustment layer. Let's play. I think that one by far is my favorite. That one's really cool too. And so that's back to neutral, no presets, right? So I can go from here and say, okay, I really like those last two. Ironically, they were the black magic. So let's use those. Now, what's interesting about this is that this one right here, it seems like it has too much saturation. So I need to have that opportunity to dive in there and make it my own. If I don't have that, I definitely don't enjoy this process as much, but I do. So I can go in here, right? We've got this adjustment layer and we're gonna go into the effects panel and it tells me this adjustment layer has the Lumetri Color SL Clean Punch, right? That is the preset that you've added to this adjustment layer. Okay, so from here, I have those panels that allow me to adjust anything I want. And that's gonna be perfect for us. Happy Insider says, also beginner. Cool, awesome. So I'm hoping this is catapulting you into a little bit more into intermediate. Okay, so this is our preset. Looks a lot like our Lumetri Color effect that we did manually. So it's very familiar, okay? It's not gonna change all that much. So we're gonna go in here and do a few adjustments because I can tell that some things were changed. I can suspect some things were changed potentially in the curved stool. Maybe there's a little bit more saturation in here. I can go into Lumetri Color and find out. So we've got this color. So now this is a preset. I can decide how much intensity the preset has, right? So I can lower the intensity. You can see here on the program viewer is a little bit more accurate than this preview right here. So be fairly aware of those things. There's a few discrepancies with the preview versus the export, but I have something for you just in case. But I notice the program is always a little bit closer than any of these spaces right here. Hopefully that improves down the road. Okay, so intensity wise, it was a little too saturated. I can simply lower that effect a little bit there. Okay, that's working for me. Maybe I can add some more contrast here in the curves panel or reduce the contrast, either way. And that looks good. Awesome. So I can label this one, maybe a different color. And now I know I can repurpose that one. I can remove that adjustment layer and repurpose it for my last color right here, my last clip. And I've got an adjusted clip. I love her attitude. It's so cool. Okay, so that looks awesome. I also like this version, right? It's a little bit more, I don't know, some blue in the shadows. I think that was working out for me. All I have to do is extend that clip, make my decision. Okay, that's looking good. This is a totally different mood. That works. A lot of shadow in this clip. So of course, a lot of blue in those shadows. So I can go into the color wheels and maybe change that to a warmer tone on those shadows and bring up that tonality too. there you go. Now I've got several options using the presets, which are still adjustable, right? We can still jump in there and put in our little twist, and the preset in itself is going to speed up your workflow. So we've got our adjustments via the curves so far, and we've got our presets down, and we know how to export our LUTs. So up next, let's see where we can jump into getting inspiration directly from photography. Okay, so let's go in here. Okay, so I'm gonna jump into, because this is medium unlimited, I'm gonna jump into Lightroom really quick. And I spend a lot of time here on Adobe Lightroom. I actually find myself here more often than not because at the core, I'm very much a photographer. So my basis is often to take pictures and then find a composition that works for me, and then find a motion that I can introduce so I can make it a video clip. And that is just my go-to because my brain still thinks like a photographer. So I'm here in Lightroom and I'm thinking, how can I repurpose some of my Lightroom edits into Premiere? So if you're familiar with Lightroom, you're gonna see here, let me make sure everything is good. Okay, so if you're familiar with Lightroom, you know that we have a lot of help on this area too when it comes to presets, right? We're still in that preset mindset. If you have the Adobe Creative Cloud subscription, you get this section that is premium, right? We got recommended, premium, and yours, basically your own presets. So under premium or under recommended, you get all of these different alternatives. And I want to try some for this one because this one has more of the ambience. I think in order for this to work, we're going to be using this image as inspiration to match a color palette. In order for this to work, we want to have as much of the ambient light that is originally in our video, okay? And this one has a lot of that. So I'm going to reset this photo real quick and find some alternatives. I really like this recommended section because it gives me alternatives that I maybe didn't think about just yet, right? So I've got things like black and white, a little bit of a category here for subtle, strong, black and white, cool, warm, and a little bit dark, nice, right? So many opportunities for moods to change in our scene. I think this one's really cool. I love the warmth. I love the contrast. Mind you, this photo doesn't have to be perfect. I just want it to be flooded with a color palette that I want to borrow from in Premiere. So let's export this image, and it could be exported small. It doesn't have to be the end all be all, but you're welcome to use your original photos that you've used in the past, that you really spend some time doing some color editing, and use it as a hack to incorporate that color into your videos. And I'm going to show you how. So let's jump over into Premiere. So we're back in Adobe Premiere, and I'm going to grab that sequence for this effect. Okay, so let's go into color wheels and match, right? So in here, I've already dropped in my image, and I can bring in the new one that we just exported actually, because I'm just into that color. So let's see. We've got image reference. That was the color. Okay. So let's bring in that photo. This is not a video, this is a photo. And then right next to it, we have this video, really cool clip of a Pontiac. So beautiful. I just love how curvilinear everything is. Okay, so we've got this clip on our right-hand side. We've got this photo on our left-hand side, all in the timeline, right? Just fine, just as we wanted. Now we were gonna jump into the color wheels and match, and we're gonna enter comparison view. This is gonna be important because in here, we're able to see our reference and our current, which we want to apply the color to. Now, if you navigate the timeline, you're going to apply this current, right? So if you navigate to the left, it'll apply that part of the timeline. If you navigate to the right, it'll apply this part. So how do you apply this one? You want to navigate with this little level right here. And of course, we want it on our photo. Another way to do it, by the way, is just reading the timeline, right? So if this is the timeline 210 for the reference, I can just drop it in here and say 210. That is where I want you to land. Boom. And that is a little bit more for a very complex timeline where you have several clips and you're like, which one is it? Oh my God. So we've got our reference, we've got our current. So far, so good. And everybody's just talking about all the cool cars they have from the 50s. I mean, the 50s was definitely the era in America to have the most beautiful cars just by default. And these cars here are just, I was besotted. I mean, a lot of them have a lot of modifiers, so a lot of things that were changed and or sought after. So there was this car that had a logo that was the original logo, but the car didn't come with it. And so he had to find it. He had to really go into a rescue mission of sorts. So they're really precious, right? And this one here is really nice, but it looks a little bland right now. There's not a lot of color happening. So let's jump into the comparison view. We've got our reference and we've got our current. So far, so good. And you can see here that in our color wheels and match, let's get to know it a little bit. We've got our shadows, we've got our midtones, we've got our highlights, okay? All of these are in default mode, right? There's no property that has been changed here. Even the levels here are in default mode. You can see them right there, right? So notice this, because within color wheels and match, we also have the HSL and vignette. I'm going to tell you right now, those are not going to change. All that will change is based on these three wheels. That is how color wheels and match works, because quite literally it's color wheels and match. Okay, so let's hit apply match. And now it's going to do a little bit of reading and try to assess what kind of hue is residing within the shadows, what kind of hue is residing within the midtones, and what kind of hue is residing within the highlights. And that is how it lands on this hue. So now you can see from here to this, it's not identical, but it definitely gets us a little bit closer to this palette. So we can go even further, right? So let's remove comparison view from here. And now we've got this color. Now, this is one of those situations where you notice I did not use an adjustment layer. That's because we have to directly impact the clip in order for it to get an assessment of like, how do I apply this color reference? So that's gonna be important in this one. No adjustment layer. Okay, so this looks good. It took us maybe 25% of the way in. It definitely appealed to all my different color wheels, and I can go a step further and go into those levers and add some color contrast. So if you go up, it's gonna go brighter. If you go down, it's gonna go darker. But this is only impacting our highlights, right? Not our shadows and not our midtones. So let's go into our shadows and bring them down so those blacks become even darker. It's a way to increase some contrast. What about our midtone? I think our midtone could do a better job of creating some contrast for us. I think that's working. Now, if you don't like this palette, if you're like, you know what, I can use a little bit of a different color in here, you can go into any one of the wheels and just change up the color. Add a little bit of blue in those shadows maybe. Is that like something we're into? Sure, why not? Could be a little bit warmer, maybe around there. Okay, so far, if we go into our effects panel, we have a Lumetri Color effect directly onto our clip. We can turn it on, we can turn it off, we can enable it, disable it, lower the intensity, all sorts of things can happen here. So we've got that. I like this so far. It's looking great. Let's add one more thing. So this is the part where I feel like a total photographer, because so far, yes, these are video clips, but I'm approaching them with the same mindset as a photographer, because I'm trying to isolate colors. I'm trying to focus in on correcting really emphasizing those hues and those contrasts, improving the image, but nevertheless approaching it from a point of view of like, how can I speed up this workflow? How can I use this workflow time and time again with different clips? Will this be reliable? And I can attest, a lot of these things I use time and time again. So it does really work out in your favor if you're in a rush, or just in general, if you want to just rely on those color palettes you're used to. So in here, I'm going to do some layering because we did it before and it worked out awesome. So let's try it again here. We're going to go into Lumetri and go into add a Lumetri effect. And you can see all of these resetted. And like I said before, nothing changes in the HSL. It's all focused on the color wheels, right? So how about we change some things in the HSL? And so when we go in here, this can get a little bit crazy and very intimidating because it's like, what is this? Okay, I'm gonna get back to Lightroom here just to give you an insight in case you're coming from a photography world, in case Lightroom intimidates you just a little bit less, because it was the case for me. I'm gonna go in here into this image and I'm gonna show you this section. It's called masking, right? Most of us are familiar with masking, either from Photoshop, maybe you've used After Effects. Maskings are the way to go, right? So there's a masking here that is based on color. So I select a color and that color is what is being masked. So I have it so that it's showing me that black is the area not selected and color is the area that is selected. So you can see all of these areas around here are not being selected, only this particular hue. Of course, the hue changes, like I said, some are tints, some are tones, and so on. So not all of it's being selected, so you have to kind of work with it. But nevertheless, this is a mask. This is a mask that we got to create here. That is essentially what the HSL secondary is. It's based on creating a mask out of a color range. So this color range isn't just based on the hue of your color, but it's also based on the saturation of that color, the luminance of that color. So we're back at this mindset of like, how can we focus into all the variations of color that exist within our footage? So let's select this red. I know there's a lot of warmth happening here, so ultimately some of the best ways to isolate a color is to find something that isn't as common. Red is a very common one, but we're gonna give it a go because nevertheless, I want this color to pop. I feel like we want that lipstick red. And right now it's falling in the backdrop too much. It's blending in too much with everything else. So this is one of the reasons why I would isolate a color. So let's go in here immediately. I'm gonna grab the eyedropper tool and I'm gonna pick something close to here, maybe somewhere in the middle, close to a crimson, maybe a red. We've got some burgundy over here. There's just so many variations of this red happening. Seems like nothing happened, right? But if we select these levers, which allow us to see the range of the color, we're gonna be able to find different variations. So you can see that it shows us a color to gray. So what's gray is not visible. What is color is visible. So what I'm doing right now is I'm reducing, like squeezing the range of that hue, just a hue. Now we can move the top arrow to try to navigate through the color spectrum, right? You can see here, the closer we get to red, the more of that car we see. Now let's navigate through the saturation of that red, right? Now we've selected the hue in the color spectrum, so many colors available. Let's talk about the saturation of it. Wherever it's most saturated, that will be selected. So you can start to see that some of the areas around the cement are also being selected because they happen to be also warm and a little bit tinted red. So you have to be aware that the bigger you make that range, the more will be selected. So if you want less selection, you want to reduce that range, okay? Now, if you want complete visibility of this, by the way, you can always select the color gray, this little arrow right here. And that's gonna give you this visibility at all times. You can change that visibility to color and black, So black hides, color is color. White and black, white reveals, black hides. You may be familiar with this if you use masks in anything in the Adobe Creative Cloud. Okay, so I tend to unlock this because I like to see it and then be able to just use the range and navigate the colors. So let's see, something like this. Okay, there's a little bit of that red around the trees. It's a really tricky one. Like I said, each footage is going to be a different variation of this approach. Okay, so if you want a really good candidate, you want a color that is not really there. For example, green. A lot of times that's why we use this, right? To isolate a color, green background and remove it all together. But in this case, I'm using it for color editing. So this for me is just fine. And so far I've got a good amount of the car in here. And this takes a little bit of playing around to really get there. I can just move this maybe over to here. I feel like I selected way too much on that one. Keys is an expert in cars. They're like, this is a 1937 Chevrolet Master, the other car, the purple Burgundy. Yeah, so many cool cars on here. I definitely would love to do a photo shoot with a person in these vehicles. That would be excellent. So let's see here as we go and make the selection. I think I'm good with that. I'm gonna give it a go. I do have room for adjustment. This is what my mask looks like. Definitely selecting a lot of the red, but plenty on the car. So I think that should be good. Fingers crossed here. So one of the things I want to do here is, now we're down here in the properties, right? So our property section allows us to redefine the parameters of our colors, right? So do we want it to be warmer? Do we want it to be cooler? Do we want it to be more contrasted, more sharpened? Those are all options within here. So we have temperature, tint, contrast, sharpen, and saturation. Of course, we can also play with the color wheels. So we have our shadows, midtones, and highlights. That will always be true across the board. And I love that, because if you want to get to know something today, that will be the one thing I would recommend to master, is just mastering those color wheels, understanding those separate channels. It will be honestly one of the biggest things that can benefit you across the board. So in here, I think I want to maybe make this temperature. Let's remove, now we're doing the color, we're going to remove this check mark. And you can start to see how it redefines that selection. And I'm going to do it really extreme here just to show where my mask is. Let's isolate a little bit more. Okay, that's working for me. Let's go over to maybe a little bit more blue. Let's increase the saturation. Some more contrast. And in the midtones and shadows, let's see how much shadows are in here. There's plenty of shadows, right? You can start to see how I end up painting this area. Around there, yeah, that works for me. Let's see, let's keep going here. Add some highlights, maybe a little bit of this. Okay, so I feel like that, hopefully that's translating, but these are subtle changes that you make, and they start to really add up. So you can see here the contrast of that purplish kind of red, crimson red that I'm starting to introduce into this. So let's see, with it, most of it is being impacted into the car, right? You can see it before and after. right? A little bit gets impacted back here. Now, when you play it, if you run into any color selections that are noticeable, maybe it creates too much noise, then I recommend that you denoise this to about 50%, the mask itself, and blur the mask about 50%. And that's gonna smooth that selection altogether. I don't know why I shook there so badly. That's nice, right? So let's see what it looks like here on our effects panel. So this is our Lumetri Color. This is our color isolation with the Lumetri Color impacted. And this is directly on the clip, right? So that's working out for me. Let's see how it used to look. In this case, I did all of my edits directly on the clip, but as you can see in all of these other variations, we're able to play around with the Lumetri Color based on all of its properties and all of the potential that it has to become a preset, to become a look, a LUT, and have all of these options to color your videos. Okay, there's a lot of room for creativity here. There's still so much to do. Of course, everything really begins in your camera. So get to know your camera, carry it around, because honestly, some of this footage would have never happened if I didn't carry my camera around. And this was my hard rule for photography, but this has also become my new rule for videography. So some of these options here, I think, are good for you to explore continuity, right, in your variations. And so as you get to know all of your footage and you bring it together, you can say, okay, this is the final color that I want. Then I want to be able to translate it over to the rest of my footage. I want to create a preset. I want to create a look, or I can just add the same effects, copy paste to my adjustment layer. And it's that simple. So folks, thank you so much. I hope that you enjoyed that process. It's been super interesting for me to explore. Let me see here to get back to. Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been so much fun. And as usual, I hope that this has been a way to get you inspired to learn from multiple mediums at the same time, because that's often how I operate. And like I said, there is a free LUT on my website available for you based on these color palettes. And I hope that you get started and experiment on Premiere Pro. Okay, there's many streams to go, and so tune in to all of those. I'm so bad at goodbyes, folks, but thank you for being here. See you on the next one.